Alright everyone, today's video is DM Pro Tip, Faster Combat. So, I see a lot of videos all the time about problems in your combat, right? It takes too long, it's way too slow, players aren't having fun, you're not having fun, and those are all not good things. So I'm going to cover a lot of things in this video to make your combats faster and better, So, basically, the problems come from many sources, right? One side is you, one side is the player. So let's tackle players first. So the players lack expertise. They can't identify their die. They can't do basic math. They don't know their abilities. They don't know the basic mechanics of the game. All that slows down the game a lot because they'll have to, they take a long time figuring out what to do on their turn. They don't know how to make an attack roll. They don't know how to track spell slots, hit points, armor class. They don't know anything, right? If they know nothing about how to play the game, naturally it's going to slow things down a lot when it's time to play. So some solutions for this: a mechanical boot camp. All right, just sit them down, make them learn their abilities, make them do like 20 or 30 practice attack rolls with different modifiers so they can get it right, because this is some pretty basic math. And if they can't do that, I mean, the game's not for everyone, right? Along that same lines of the game's not for everyone is pre-screening. All right, when you invite someone to the game, hey, make sure they can do basic math and that they care enough. Not even that they can do basic math. Make sure they care enough to try and learn. All right, because if you care enough to try and learn over maybe like a month, you'll have learned a lot of the things that you hadn't learned initially. You'll get better at the quick math. So just make sure that they care enough about the game. That also goes into session 0. Is some pre-screening. So another solution is dice identification training. It's much the same as mechanical boot camp. You just make them identify the dice one after the other for like 10 minutes, all right? Now, one of my favorite ones is to basically reward them for their quick math, okay? If at my table personally, if a player is faster than me at adding their modifiers, they get +1. Just permanently on every single check ever. If they are faster than me, they get +1. I'm really fast, so they have to be pretty fast to do it. And I gradually built them up, so if they're brand new players, I go slower on purpose. And if they're more experienced players, I go full speed. And they rarely get that bonus, but they're always trying for it. They're always trying to get those numbers out quick. So that's kind of one way to motivate your players if they're comfortable being the pace they are, to motivate them to be faster, is if you give them a bonus, right? Because that solves a lot of bad behavior. And I can have an added negative of kind of hiding some bad behavior of not caring. Like if you have a bonus for it, then they might care even when they really don't care much about the game. And that could be a negative, but that's probably not going to happen very often. Now, my two more really good ones are letting them fail, okay? So if they don't know their abilities, let's say they're surrounded by 3 guys, and they've got something like Word of Radiance, right? That targets everyone within, I think, 5 feet. So they have Word of Radiance, there's 3 guys, and they choose to use their hammer or something like that instead, or Toll the Dead on one enemy, right? Let them take 3 hits. Honestly, if that was the case, I would fudge the dice in favor of hitting them 3 times for high damage, and then pointing out afterwards, like, oh, shoot, you could have used your Word of Radiance there. That would have been so good to save you from taking all that damage. Then they're going to want to remember to use their Word of Radiance, all right? So let them fail, hit them hard, make it a hard fail, and point out their mistake afterwards. And then friendly practice duels are a good one. It just lets them get a little familiar with a little bit of combat. Say, okay, roll initiative. Okay, here's this, that, and the other. You can take your time. You can go slow because it's just a friendly duel, right? So that's part of it. Now, another part, that's the mechanical part. Another part is bad behavior. So if a player has bad behavior, it's going to really mess with your game in a lot of profound ways, right? Like if they're not paying attention, if they don't care, if they show up late, if they're disrespectful and disruptive, those are all going to slow down your combat so much. Especially, this one makes me so angry because it encompasses all the rest of them, is if they do it for the lulz, okay? If they have a stupid character, I don't want to say stupid, but yeah, I want to say stupid. There are stupid characters. If they have a stupid character that's just a do it for the lulz kind of guy, and you don't want that at your table, if you don't want it at your table, if it's a silly game where you mess around, go for it. But if you want a serious campaign, you can't have that kind of character there. All right, and that's why you need to talk to them, right? You need to communicate, hey, I don't like this, stop doing this, and then if they keep doing it, kick them to the curb, all right? There's 1 million players and there's 100 DMs, okay? You'll find another guy. Session 0, this is a lot of things that you can weed out in a good session 0, is to establish expectations in the social contract, right? I want my players to pay attention, don't be on your phone, know your roles, know your math, care about your characters, show up on time. I had a guy in one of my games, okay? IRL, not the best guy, all right? But he was a really nice guy, and he showed up on time, he knew his roles, he knew his character, he was proficient every time, and he showed up with some wacky homebrew once. I was like, all right, you know what? I trust you enough, and it was a lot of fun, right? So because he had so much behavior, I trusted him to do something crazy that he wanted to do. I really trusted him with a lot because of, because he was a respectful player and he had good behavior, right? You can say no. You can always say no as a DM, okay? I had one of my friends, one of my close personal friends, ask me the other day if he could play some homebrew in my game. It was weird. It was a healer, and I didn't think it would jive very well with the party, so I said no. He kept on asking a few times. You just had to be assertive, not aggressive, clear communication, and just say no, right? Because I didn't want it on my table. I didn't know if I could handle it. From a DM perspective, I didn't know if I could handle it, and so I just said no, and things were resolved, and he played a character and he had fun. He's really into monks, so they'll usually have a fallback. If you tell them no, they're not going to just, oh, well, I'm not going to play. All right, I'll find someone else. You can't be a pushover, right? If he had just asked and asked and asked and I said yes, okay, well, that would have set the pattern of me saying yes if you ask me enough. You can't be a pushover. When you say no, it has to mean no, okay? Now, another thing, the power differential is in your favor. Like I said, you're like a hot girl at prom, and the D&D players are every guy who doesn't have a date, all right? There's 100 players to 1 DM. You can always find someone to play with. And then one of my pro tips is to, I don't know, for me anyways, I get super nervous about people canceling. I guess it was my first group. And I reward my early birds. If I have someone show up early to the session, if I have them never be late, I give them a bonus. It's not hard to balance for if you really feel like it. And so the other half of the game, that's PCs. That's covered PCs pretty well. Now the other half of the game is the DM. So DMs, you guys can slow your combats down, right? Your own actions can slow it down. So a few things to make them faster, I'll just use for... Not even just better, but faster, I would say, because I'll have another video on better because it's getting close to 10 minutes. Use the average damage for your monsters, all right? It's fun to roll. It's faster to have the average damage. You need to roll the attack roll. I get it, okay? Attack roll is something that you should definitely roll. All other checks, the saving throws, the attack rolls, everything else, you really don't need to roll for, right? You just take the average damage. I guess it's really just checks and damage, but you should take the average damage. It makes things so much faster. They hit harder too. I know the average in all the monsters for all the books is the low average, which is the straight up mathematical average. In D&D, there's what's called the low average and the high average, or what I call the low average and the high average moves. When you're dealing with something like your level up, where you gain your hit points, that's the high average. When you're dealing with something like resistance to damage or jack of all trades, that's the low average, right? So the high average is you take the real average and then you add 1 to it. It's crazy. But yeah, so that's the high average. So use the high average damage to take the average damage, add 1 to it. Add 1 per damage die because they round it down every time. They have 6 seconds or less to declare their action, and so do the monsters. The monsters can't sit here. I give my players 6 seconds. You should give your players 6 seconds too, because that makes the game so much faster. It takes a 20-minute turn, turns it into a 5-minute turn, a 3-minute turn, maybe even 1 minute or less. If everyone had a turn of less than a minute, combat would go by so much faster, right? So 6-second rounds for both the PC and the monster, okay? This is something I'm guilty of, is I give my players 6 seconds to declare the action, but the monsters get more time, right? That's something I have to check in myself, is to make my monsters go fast too. Because it's fun to make your players go fast. But the monsters, you want them to have these big epic plays, and unless you're a really big brain, it takes a little bit more than 6 seconds. You got to just kind of train yourself to give them 6 seconds to make their action. Okay, another thing. 8 or less NPCs, period. Okay, this is allies and enemies. 8 or less. I shoot for 5 monsters. that are all stronger than the party. Because that makes for a challenging combat, and that's the baseline. Sometimes it gets even harder. I threw an Alhoon at 3 level 3s, and they had a lot of fun, and they played smart, and they beat them. And that's what I expect from my players, because they've run through this gauntlet of death so far where they have to play smart all the time, or they die. And after a few games, hey, they figured out play smart. And then the final thing I would suggest to increase your efficiency as a DM is a number sheet. So this is basically, it could be anything, but a number sheet is... it's for your players. You have a stat sheet for your monsters, but your number sheet has all the players. You write their names, and then you have just a column across. You have their armor class, their hit points, their attack bonus, their spell save DC, their spell attack bonus, all that kind of relevant stuff. And then I like to throw on the passive scores as well. So I give them passive perception, right? That's in the game, and then it's implied that there's things beyond perception because there's passive investigation from observant. So just all the passive skills that you want to use, all the numbers that you want to have for your players, you want to have that quick and ready access right up front in front of you. That makes it a lot faster. Now here's a final pro tip, all right? Because that was the DM part. Here's a final pro tip though. If your combat is repetitive, it's going to be boring. If your combat feels like a chore, like if they're slogging through and they're fighting another group of undead as they traverse through the swamp, that's going to be hella boring, all right? If it's tedious, they're going to get bored, all right? And if it's a boring combat, it's going to be a slow combat. It's just going to feel so long. It's awful. Don't have a boring combat. Something should change every round. The terrain, the monsters you're fighting, the move they used, right? It shouldn't be the zombie swings again, Maybe the zombie swings, and then it bites, and then it grabs, and then another zombie starts to claw its hand out of the mud, and then the mud starts to deal necrotic damage and heal the zombies and damage you, right? That's just an example I just came up with just now. So you can do it. You can come up with a lot of really good changes to your combat, and beforehand, if you're not as quick of a thinker as some people, I don't want to call myself a quick thinker because I'm not, but if you're not a quick thinker, write it out beforehand. That's what I do sometimes, is I write my combat changes. I'll have, okay, here's my combat, here's 15 things that could change, and I'll throw them in whatever order I feel like. Layer actions, that's another thing that's really good to change. Is layer actions, legendary actions. I actually hate legendary resistances on almost all monsters. I think Strahd is one of the few that actually is good to have a legendary resistance on, but I hate legendary resistances. Honestly, it feels bad as a player if you use this ability and the monster's like, nah, I'm gonna succeed. So if you want if you want your monsters, your big bads, to be able to survive a lot of rounds of combat using things like hold person, just give them high saves. Give them +6 to every save if you want to. Don't tell the players that, but give them +6 to every save. Like, oh, I pass. And then, just feels good. Or give them legendary resistance and don't tell the party that. That's another option. Anyways, good luck, goodbye, enjoy your games.